Hi, everyone. I'm Matthew DeSantis,
And I'm Kaylie Shapiro
and welcome to another Road to the Kentucky Derby.
and the Kentucky Oaks.
Welcome, everyone, to another Road to the Kentucky Derby and Kentucky Oaks here on NYRA Bets YouTube. We are doing a day after recap of the Virginia Derby and Virginia Oaks with myself and my colleague at NYRA Bets, Kaylie Shapiro. Before we get to recapping what was a really exciting day at Colonial Downs and what we saw and how it impacts the Derby and Oaks Road, want to remind you to press that like button and subscribe to NYRA Bets YouTube today. Subscribing is entirely free of cost, just notifies you when new videos drop on the channel, race previews, full card analyses, weekly handicapping and betting tutorials, and so much more. So we got you covered no matter what you're into in horse racing and handicapping. Kaylie, we're almost at 4,000 subscribers on the channel, so maybe you could be lucky number 4,000 if you subscribe. But listen, Kaylie, we had a big weekend at Colonial Downs. It was an exciting weekend. Obviously, this was
Mhm.
a special 3-day event, and it was a lot of fun to watch a track that we don't normally get a chance to watch in the spring.
Yeah, it was super fun. I mean, it was pretty challenging, I guess, to compare those performances to races that were run on that track before, considering,
Mm-hmm.
horses of that caliber on the dirt haven't really run there before. But
Yeah.
yeah, I thought that it was pretty interesting to see throughout the day how the track was playing. I know obviously the track was pretty fast, but we did see I think some interesting dynamics play out, such as horses that maybe were able to make up some ground, like Omaha. So
Mm-hmm.
definitely a lot to unpack.
Yeah, it was. And listen, over the 3 days, speed did very well in general. The track has been running very fast. Jason Beam, who's the traditional track announcer there, who's down at Tampa Bay Downs right now. That's why they had Travis Stone come in for the 3 days. But Jason had mentioned, listen, the main track had been running fast the last couple of years, the way that they've just been running on the dirt there. And that certainly played out again. A lot of horses, you didn't necessarily need to be on the lead, but you needed to be close to the lead. You could make up some ground, but a lot of times you saw some horses flatten out from the back of the field when they made
Mhm.
that initial move, middle move, late move sort of a thing. So something to keep in mind as we talk about it. But obviously, we'll start by talking about the Virginia Oaks. And this race was defined in some ways by an unexpected scratch of Gowell's Delight, who's going
Mhm.
instead down to the Fairground Oaks this coming weekend. And but quite frankly, facing a monster in the form of Good Cheer, who we'll talk about a little
Mhm.
bit later in the program. But that really let Fondly, the Grand Motion horse, who you and I both liked as our top choice last week, as your really overwhelming favorite. And Kaylie, she came through with a really gutsy effort in her second career start. We're going to pick up the replay here at the top of the stretch, but I was really impressed by the way she won this race and overtaking Anonyma in the stretch.
Yeah, I thought so too. I mean, I thought that her debut, that she looked like she was covering more ground or, able to close more effectively than she was here. So maybe it was the track, honestly, or just still a bit of greenness. I mean, she did get there. So, that was a pretty good performance from her. The Kenny McPeak filly Anonyma did a lot of the dirty work up front and, was still able to hang on for third. I do wonder with that speed figure that Fondly ran, how she's going to stack up with the Oaks horses that, are kind of, I'd say a notch above that. But
Mm-hmm.
she definitely does fit into the conversation. That was only her second career start, even if it didn't come up as fast as we would have thought. I mean, I thought that it was a pretty good effort from her, and still obviously is a bit green as well. So she can only improve from here.
I agree. I was impressed by the effort. You saw those fractions. I mean, 46 and change, 110 and
Mhm.
change to the half and the 6 furlong marks. Remember, this was a 1 turn mile and a mile and a 16th race. So they were cooking there, and she was right off of Anonyma that entire time. And it was interesting. I saw an interview with Irad Ortiz Jr. after the race was over, and he said, at the top of the stretch, I knew I could get by at any time.
Mhm.
And he knew he had the horse under him to be able to do it. He gave a lot of credit to Anonyma. He goes, she was really gutsy. She refused to go
Mhm.
away, but I knew I had the horse that I could go by.
Mhm.
And you mentioned and teased at the Beyer Speed Figure, came back with only a 70 Beyer Speed Figure, rather slow. I'll be honest, my initial reaction is that doesn't seem right. That seems maybe too low. Reminds me a little bit of the speed figures coming out of the Lecomte If you remember, that race came back very slow, and we
Mhm.
saw all of the horses coming out of that Lecomte really improve their Beyer speed figures significantly. So a horse like Magnitude come out and freak in the Risen Star. Built came back, ran much, much better next time out. Even Calling Card, these other horses were running much improved races coming out of that Lecomte. So I think that it's something where you really do want to maybe just, put a little asterisk next to that. I think the dynamics of the one turn mile and a 16th make it a little bit interesting, but
Mhm.
a very promising horse. And like you said, second career start can only get better, presumably, from here. And Graham Motion has got plenty of things. He's a great trainer, and he's got plenty of time to get this one ready for whatever comes next, because it's still a little bit of time, obviously, until the Oaks. Does she run in something like the Ashland at Keeneland? We'll have to wait and see. That's
Mhm.
possible she gets one more prep in before the Kentucky Oaks, but she's in the starting gate one way or the other.
Yeah, definitely. I'm curious to see where she goes next. I think what you brought up about the Beyer speed figure is a good point. I think that if it was any higher than the American Promise race, I mean, that would have had to be in 100 that he ran. So I
Yeah,
understand with how the times came back that that's what she got. I mean, it does raise a question mark. She did run a 77, I think, on debut, and now a
yeah,
70. It's not that big of a deal, I mean, in terms of her future,
yeah.
but yeah, definitely came up a little bit light. I'm not overly impressed with any of the fillies that she was facing. I know Anonymous ran a really good race, but that's not Kenny's main Oaks contender either. There was an
Right.
interview with him after where he was saying that they were there to get her, black type on her record for her value as a broodmare. So that doesn't really speak much to her, maybe her Oaks aspirations as opposed to Gal's Delight. But yeah, so it's not really clear just how good the fillies are that she faced. But I mean, I think for her second career start, she ran pretty well. So she's definitely on my radar. She made it into the 10th slot, not to spoil it, but definitely a part of the conversation.
Yeah, I think so. I think, and really what's so interesting about this Phillies group, and I'll let you talk more about it when we get to your rankings, is there really is kind of this top tier. And then
Hmm.
after that, there's a whole lot of just, I don't want to say kind of a middle ground, but there that second tier is
Right.
there's a lot of volatility there. And so you have your quiet sides, you have your Tenmas, you have your good cheer. Maybe you want to include Lakara in that conversation in terms of your top 3 and 4.
Hmm.
After that, it's pretty fluid, I would say.
Yeah.
And so she inserts herself into that conversation. She could improve. She's kind of like you said, maybe at the lower end of your list right now, but she's on the list. And so listen, you go out, you win a Kentucky Oaks prep race and get 50 points, you're going to be in the conversation, especially one that has a lot more potential. Now, what's interesting is transitioning from the Oaks to the Derby, kind of a tale of two different stories, right? Because here's Fondley in the Oaks, second career start, getting the win. On the flip
Hmm.
side, you got American Promise, who's been running a lot for
Hmm.
Dwayne Lukas. Of course, that's the way the coach runs him. He runs him regularly. He keeps him active. This is a horse that's been running a lot, and you had a feeling was sitting on a big one, and indeed he was, because Getaway Car really got out of the gate well, but American Promise was attached to his hip most of the way around. And come the top of the stretch, he just put away Getaway Car without any problem and just pulled away coming down the stretch. And it was an impressive stretch run. And he earned a 95 Beyer speed figure for this.
Yeah, it was a really gutsy effort for him to go after Getaway Car. He put pressure on him the whole way until it was time for him to make his move, and he won by a ton. I mean, I think I saw a lot of comments about how it looks like he was crawling home and stuff like that. But if you look at the horses behind him, they do not look like they're necessarily crawling home. So that speaks to just how big this horse is and his stride. I remember back in Saratoga seeing him as a 2-year-old, and me and you had talked about him, I think maybe the
Yeah.
second career start that I really liked him. I knew he would take some time to develop, and then I saw him on at Churchill Downs. He was in the race after Sovereignty that day, and I was impressed by how much he looked like he grew between Saratoga and then. So I think he's grown a ton and really filled into himself, and he's really heading in the right direction at the right time. I mean, this horse has pedigree for days. He's
Mhm.
physically impressive. Like, he's twice the size of the horses in that
Yeah.
race. If you look at his shoulder and his chest, he's like a freight train. So I'm really impressed by him. I know I'm pretty happy about it. He was my top pick. I'm really happy that he held his value come post time as well. I thought that he was amazing value looking at that race come post time. And yeah, he definitely fits into the conversation for the Derby for sure. I know it's going to depend a lot about how the Baffert horses draw in relation to where he draws in the Derby, just how it could set up. But he really proved the ability to rate there and sit off of a horse as well, which we hadn't seen from him in the past. So I thought that also told us a lot about him too.
Oh, it did. Listen, it was a good effort. Like you said, he sat off. He was right there. I mean, he had a kind of an ideal trip in some ways in
Hmm.
terms of placement. They were still going really fast up front, so for him to be able to continue to find more as as they hit the top of the stretch was certainly impressive. But sat kind of an ideal trip. Didn't take any kickback in that regard. Was able to just sit off the flank of Getaway Car, and then put that horse away. And I think what's so interesting is it kind of ended up casting Dwayne Lucas's other horse in maybe a little bit of a different light after the race, because I would say before the race, there was a lot of buzz about Caldera, who is Dwayne Lucas's other horse who's entered in the fairground and the Louisiana Derby, I should say, this coming weekend. This horse had dueled with Getaway Car at the Sunland Derby last time out. Well, Getaway Car didn't look so great. And so suddenly, all of that buzz about Caldera, amazingly, all these people who said Caldera is a lock to win the Louisiana Derby, they stopped showing up in my replies, Kaylie, for some reason after the race was over. I don't know why. I don't know why that happened. But it was, you don't want to make too much of what one race says about another. But it was interesting that there are two Lukas horses in this regard, and both of them battled with Getaway Car, and one of them, Caldera, came up a little bit short, and one of them, American Promise, just absolutely buried Getaway Car and said, "I'll see you later," and just buried that field. So it was a very, very impressive effort. Like you said, big colt, and it was a $750,000 purchase. I think that's something else. Dwayne has started getting these big time purchases in recent years since Secret Oath, and this is one of them. And so, very, very impressive colt though, and Render Judgment came in second, was a long way back on 83 Beyer. My boy Omaha valiantly finished third with an 82 Beyer Speed Figure. But it was a fun race to
Hmm.
watch.
It definitely was a fun race. As of right now, I mean, prefer American Promise over the other Dwayne Lucas horse. I'm really happy though that he has a couple good ones going into
Yeah,
the Series Derby. How exciting is that? And just to see the way that horse, how confident he was, just
yeah,
cruising by Getaway Car like that. I mean, I said prior that he did run that 95 Beyer
yeah.
Speed Figure that I thought was stood out against this field. So to see that he was able to run that back as well was really good. I mean, he should be able to continue to improve, and not like he's already proved a lot, but yeah, I'm excited about this horse for sure.
I know I am as well. Very excited for him, and I think it is a little bit of Back to the Future. I mean, I can speak to this. You weren't even born yet, but I can speak to this in terms of growing up in the 1990s and watching the Kentucky Derby in my household when I was 9, 10, 12, 13 years old. Dwayne Lucas, Bob Baffert. I mean, those were the guys you saw all the time. Now we just got to get Nick Zito with a Derby horse, get our boy Nick back in here, and then it's really like the 1990s again, because it was those three guys were the icons of racing back when I was
Yeah.
growing up watching the Derby. They had all the best Derby horses every year,
I
and it's
mean,
great to see the coach
yeah.
and Bob back at it again. So it's going to be a lot of
Yeah,
fun.
definitely. Those were the three big household names and growing up for me, those three and Mott. So,
Yeah.
I love a showdown like that. So I'm really excited this year's Derby. I mean, it's going to have all of them. So that's going to be really great.
It is. It really is going to be great. So, listen, with that being said, let's talk a little bit about where we stand with the Kentucky Derby and Oaks point standings. On the Derby side of things, Cole Battle still up top with 70 points. Owen Almighty, after that victory a couple weeks ago in the Tampa Bay Derby, is sitting in second. You got Citizen Bull, who's, of course, pointed towards the Santa Anita Derby. Sovereignty, who's going to be pointed towards the Florida Derby. Now you see American Promise up on this page. Flood Zone is a little bit of an asterisk. This is a horse that's going over to the UAE Derby after winning the Gotham. I will say this: Flood Zone's work partner, Lion Injustice, Lion Injustice, broke its maiden very impressively at Colonial for Brad Cox, earned a 92 Beyer Speed Figure, actually. So this horse has been working out with some very nice company who also might have some promising future in this division as well. Maybe not for the Derby, but might be kind of a horse to consider later in the summer at Saratoga. You have a horse like Journalism, who's back on the work tab, looking terrific, and pointed towards that Santa Anita Derby as well. Getaway Car has a lot of points, but I think that effort certainly does make you wonder whether Baffert really wants to send this horse going a mile and a quarter, or maybe this is more of a Pat Day mile type of horse that you put on the undercard. Chancer obviously is going to be running again at the Bluegrass. Built is running this weekend down at the Louisiana Derby. So honestly, you're really getting a sense of who's going to be in the starting gate, because I think you could probably draw a line through Flood Zone and probably Getaway Car, but these other eight, I think all are pretty serious contenders to be in the starting gate should everybody stay healthy and on track.
Yeah, definitely. And on the Philly side, I mean, not much movement there compared to last week, besides Fondly getting up there, which, she's going to be in the starting gate so long as everything goes smoothly between now and then. So that should be good. I mean, I'm excited that she made it up on the list and got some points, because I do think that the way that she finished up that race shows that she shouldn't appreciate added distance as well as, her pedigree. So I think she should be pretty competitive. And I mean, I don't think she belongs above a Good Cheer, but this is just points. So
yeah, absolutely. Good Cheer is going to accumulate a whole lot of points this coming week down at the Fairground Oaks. She has a chance to really assert herself and get that 100 points. And so, listen, with that, let's transition over to our respective standings. And Kaylie, you said your top 10 didn't really change much in this regard, but you did move Fondly up into that number 10 position. Cipriani falls off as she's not been on the work tab of late. And so, an interesting top 10, but again, a top 10, kind of like we talked about, maybe a little top heavy in this regard, with those top three, I think, really standing out for you.
Yeah, and I think that this list is going to change a ton in the next couple of weeks. I mean, we have the Fairground Oaks this weekend, and then we have the Fantasy, which is my favorite Oaks prep, or at least maybe in my top three favorites. So I'm excited for that one. There should be a big movement during that time. Quiet Side's pointing there, and Good Cheer is obviously going to be running this weekend, which I'm excited about. And Tenma's continuing to work well. And same with Ballerina Dioro. And yeah, I did take Cipriani off just because she hasn't posted a work. But Fondly made it into my top 10 at number 10. So yeah, definitely going to be a ton of movement though in the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, it certainly feels that way, and very similar on the boys' side of things. Listen, I moved American Promise up to 9. I moved Barnes, I think, maybe up a spot to 8. Disruptor kind of as a Todd Pletcher horse that is going to be likely running in the Florida Derby or maybe the Bluegrass. We'll have to wait and see where kind of Todd wants to point this one. I think Grande is likely pointed to the Wood Memorial, it appears, who's one of his other potentially kind of less experienced Derby horses, but I'm high on Disruptor, who's a $1.15 million son of Gunrunner. And Cornucopian is the other name that probably is up on not up on my list, that might not be on other people's list. That's a Baffert horse. Though I will say he registered to work on March 5th, and I don't believe he's registered to work since. I'll have to see if he worked today, maybe, because I know there were a bunch of works out at Santa Anita today. So might have worked today out there. Something to keep in mind. But one of the things I will say about my Derby top 10 in general is, honestly, in my eyes, it's the top 2 and everybody else. That Journalism and Sovereignty are just so far above where everybody else is, in my opinion, at this point. And the next couple of weeks, hey, maybe somebody takes that big step forward and really kind of inserts themselves. But right now, it's them and everybody else.
I completely agree on the Philly side. For me, it's the top 3 and everybody else. Yeah. And I think that everything. I think those three can even move around as well. I mean,
Sure.
Tenma has, I really like Tenma. Clearly, I have a very high opinion of her, but she's going to continue. She's probably going to finish out the preps out in Santa Anita, do
Hmm.
probably get one more before she comes. I would like to have seen her come and face horses over here, or maybe go to a different prep like the Fantasy I was kind of
Sure.
hoping for. I don't really know what their exact plans are. I would have liked to see that. But so I think maybe her and Quiet Side can end up flipped going into the
Yeah.
Oaks. But my top three, I'd say I'm pretty confident in. And yeah, I'm not sure when the Derby Oaks, the future pool is closing in relation to when this is posted. But I will say Quiet Side presented the best value if you are playing those futures. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think that she's a real serious filly. And I love the way that she's working as well. I wish I could put her
Yeah.
higher.
Yeah, I know she's working really, really well for Johnny Ortiz, and I definitely like this one a lot. She could absolutely kind of stamp herself winning the Fantasy. Of course, the race Torpedo Anna won last year also. Uh, and yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. I mean, even a horse like Journalism floated up to, I think, 7-1 at one point in the Derby future pools. And I'll be
Mhm.
honest, while I don't like usually betting on a horse that is that short of a price, the reality is if he wins the Santa Anita Derby, which I think he can and will, he's going to be 5-2 in the starting gate of the Kentucky
Yeah.
Derby. So if you can get 7-1, by definition, that's good value because you're getting a better odds on a horse than you will on the day of the race. And so now that, of course, then has to coincide with your opinion of the horse and whether or not you think the horse has that percentage of a chance to win the
Mhm.
race. But nevertheless, I think that it's interesting to see which horses took a lot of money in that pool, which horses maybe got lost on the board a little bit. I'll be honest, the horse that I'm sneakily really rooting for is Chunk of Gold. This horse has two Phil vibes to me. That's a horse I'm really looking forward to watching this coming weekend in the Louisiana Derby. And speaking of that, we have a big upcoming schedule this week. We have the Louisiana Derby and the Fairground Oaks running at Fairgrounds. It two really good fields. Louisiana Derby, I already have an early preview up on the YouTube channel. You can check that out. John Hancock's your very tepid 7-2 morning line favorite there. I think you can beat him. I think there's some interesting horses like a Vasimo, like a Chunk of Gold in that race. I think there's a lot of speed. I think you can maybe come from off the pace. So we'll be back later in the week to preview that. But Kaylie on the Fairground Oak side, oh, that's a loaded race.
Oh my God, it's super loaded. Obviously, good cheer. It's going to be your favorite. I don't think that I'm going to find a way to get around that horse. And what's interesting is I listened to the same McPeak interview that I was talking about with Anonyma, and
Mhm.
he had made reference to, Gal's Delight going over to face Good Cheer. And he was like, we scratched out of this one, we know we're going to face a monster over there.
Yeah.
In relation to Good Cheer. And he's usually I mean, the way he talked about Torpedo Anna last year, nothing could have rattled him. Fair enough, but
Yeah.
I just think that says a lot. He admits, that horse is coming over to
What
face a monster, which is obvious, but yeah.
it's interesting. And one thing I will say is you also are scratching out a couple of things. One, you're getting the horse an extra week of rest before its race. So now the horse
Mhm,
gets an extra week to before the Fairground Oaks and one less week of rest in between now and the Kentucky Oaks, which I
mhm,
think is the timing of this is kind of important. The other thing to point out is if she runs second in the Fairground Oaks, she would get as many points
exactly.
as she would have if she had won the Virginia Oaks. There's a 50
Exactly.
point prep there. It's a 100 point prep here. Finishing second guarantees you 50 at the Fairground Oaks. So from a point standpoint of like, I want to get in the starting gate of the Kentucky Oaks, doesn't really make much of a difference. I think it's probably better for her just in terms of that rest and running cycle to be there. But you're right. I mean, she's in this race, but there's a lot of other nice horses, whether it's Girl Math, whether it's a horse like Her Laugh, a Hava, who's the half Devava for Cherie DeVoe. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a good field.
And Quick Kick, who I'm really excited to see
Yeah.
run back as well. She's a filly I have on my list. And Bless the Broken is cross entered between the two. I know she's working at Turfway, so she's probably going to go to the Bourbonette, I'd assume. And I think that's probably a better spot for her to pick up some more points. But that's a filly I have I still have some interest in, even though she's not on my list. I think
Yeah.
that she's run some sneaky good races, and who knows how she could improve or how she is improving. So I'd be interested to see how she runs as well when I take a deep dive into it. I'm definitely going to use her in some way, especially in the Bourbonette. But
Yeah.
yeah, and girl math, I'm pretty excited to see. I mean, I was kind of bummed she scratched, obviously, to go here, which is a good
Yeah.
thing. It speaks to maybe their confidence as well with her.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that she's gonna improve, switching back to the dirt. So I'm excited
Yeah.
for that as well.
Absolutely. And, speaking of that Bourbonette Oaks, interestingly enough, that race you mentioned, Bless the Broken Cross entered in that race, but also features the horse White Rocks. And if you remember,
Mhm.
that's the Arnaud Delacour horse who wired the field last time out in that Cincinnati Trophy and got like 8 lengths clear. And it was a
Mhm.
speed favoring track. And I said, man, she really shook loose up on the front end. She's a bet against next time out because there's no way she's going to get the same trip. Well, just looking over the PPs, there is exactly 0.0 other speed in this race. So it's very possible that Victor Carrasco goes, let's run it back and let's try to do the exact same thing again.
Mhm.
We're just going to try to wire the field, gate to wire, and try to do it again with White Rocks. But that's going to be an interesting dynamic to see if anybody decides, hey, we got to press this horse a little bit more. We got to get up there because otherwise we're not going to be able to catch her. And so that's like I said,
Yeah.
really interesting race. You got a couple of other nice horses in there as well. You have a horse like Admit for Tom Drury Jr., who I think is a pretty nice runner as well. Yeah, so it's going to be like I said, really fun race. You got a couple of turf horses trying their hand in there as well. So that Bourbonette Oak should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, and Bracelet is on the also
Yeah,
eligible list, I think. So curious to see if she gets in. I think she could play a role if she gets in the Brad
yeah,
Cox filly. So yeah, it should be
yeah.
good.
Absolutely. And of course, on the boys' side, we got the Jeff Ruby Stakes. I already mentioned Two Phils, one of my personal favorite horses the last couple of years, who had won this race. Obviously, a horse like Animal Kingdom won this race way back in the day when it was, I think it was before the Jeff Ruby Stakes, and won this race going into the Kentucky Derby and then went on to win. Obviously, Rich Strike ran in this race, ran third in this race, and then went on to win the Kentucky Derby. So we have seen this transition from from synthetic, I should say, to the dirt go rather well. And that's Jeff Ruby Stakes. Like I said, interesting race. You have a horse like Calling Card,
Mhm.
California Burrito, who ran a big race last time out, winning that John Battaglia. Baby Max, who I think is another kind of an interesting horse, getting the blinkers put on for Kelsey Danner. You have D. Wayne's horse, Innovator, who ran a big race in that Lecomte and then came back and just didn't really get the right sort of trip, in my opinion, in the Rebel. You have Poster for Owen Hardy, who I think is a pretty nice horse whose form was flattered a little bit by how well Owen Almighty ran back in the Tampa Bay Derby. And then a horse you and I are both really high on is Maximum Promise, who was kind of running against the track last time out in that Battaglia and might be
Mhm.
able to step forward again.
Yeah, that was the first one I looked at was Maximum Promise. Definitely going to use him in some way. Need to take a deep dive into that one. Haven't really looked that much yet, but definitely a pretty tough field. So I'm excited to dig into it and come back and preview it. And the Louisiana Derby, obviously John Hancock is your big name in that race, but I have a lot of interest, I think, in Built, honestly. And there's a McKinsey in there. Let
Furio.
me,
Yeah.
Furio, who just has a big long shot, maybe like deep underneath, using that horse in some way. One that caught my
Mm-hmm.
eye that has some pedigree on him. I know you touched on that in your early preview of the race, but yeah,
Yeah.
definitely excited to dive into those. I mean, those are pretty jam-packed fields, all four of them. So should be a fun time to come and preview them later this week.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, with that being said, let's wrap this episode up. Kaylie, thank you so much for joining me. Appreciate it. Thank you all for watching this road to the Kentucky Derby and Kentucky Oaks. As Kaylie said, we'll be back later in the week with a preview of all four of those races, and I'll be doing a capping the card on the Louisiana Derby Day card at Fairgrounds. For Kaylie Shapiro, my name is Matthew DeSantis, wishing you a great and prosperous day at the races, and reminding you, friends, it's now post time.